Want to thank folks for joining us this morning. Steve Millington in studio with us, too. He's the chairman of the Twin Falls County Republican Party. And Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. And we have a very patient caller waiting for us in the wings. Caller, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Good morning. Um, you were talking about how the Republicans can't seem to get together on things. And one of the examples or thoughts that I had was that you remember back when we had you might say the challenge for the Speaker of the House, and Meadows, I think, of the Freedom Caucus was one of the considerations. But when it came down to it, none of those guys wanted to step up and put their whatever hat in the ring or their name on the line.
Yeah, if I recall, Ryan was somewhat of a compromise choice.
Yeah, but my point being is that, if these guys want to stand for principles, then lead for principles as well. Don't just go hide in the corner and say, well, we've got our principles and we're not going to change. Why not step forward and lead the whole thing?
That's a good point.
That's a very interesting observation.
Jim Jordan doesn't want the job.
Nope. He prefers to be over there with the Freedom Caucus people. And in some respects, this is painting him with a ugly brush. But in some respects, they become detractors rather than proactive, making things happen. And that's one of the reasons why I think the Republicans have such a difficult time. They hate each other.
What did Eric Erickson say? That the Freedom Caucus has allowed the establishment Republicans an excuse. They don't have to do anything with things like Obamacare. They can just point the blame and claim it's Jordan and Labrador and those fellows.
It's all those guys in that Freedom Caucus.
Right.
It's not our fault. It's those guys over there. It's always somebody else. Not our problem. They are the reason.
I guess it means that some Republicans are okay with Obamacare.
It's beginning to look that way, isn't
it? we mentioned Freedom Caucus. We've got legislators here in Idaho contemplating creating one of their own.
Yes, we do, as a matter of fact. We've got a couple of freshman legislators who have decided that they need to create the Idaho Freedom Caucus. And we have a Mike Kingsley from Lewiston and a Brian Zollinger from Idaho Falls. They are both freshman first-term representatives, and they are saying that they are a little bit concerned that some of the real conservative issues are being blocked by the legislative leadership.
But they're not involved, on the other hand, with this group that calls themselves the Six Pack, or maybe even Seven.
They're not. They're not part of that organization. They are apart from it. So now, if we take this thing just at its face and look at it, and they say, we think we have maybe 10 members, and we hope to have upwards of 20 before the end of the legislative session. Unfortunately, we don't know what that number is. The legislative session is about to come to an end, and so it'll be interesting to see what they come up with for ongoing legislative issues. However, we could have three little factions, if you will, within the Republican Party in the state legislature. We have the, quote, Republican legislature. We have the pack of six, or whatever they call it, over here. I guess
it's 70 now, if Dorothy's included.
Yeah, it seems to be kind of growing. And I also think that particular group may kind of morph into this Idaho Freedom Caucus. Hard to say. But at least we could have three different groups of people involved in the politics in the legislature, just on the Republican side. So, it makes, I look at it and I say to myself, okay, this is really nice, guys, except that the Democrats are not divided and they're not splintered. They are together. They have their little meeting, and maybe it's because their meeting room is kind of small and they can all get together in one corner.
They have an old phone booth, from what I hear.
Not a very, yeah. And so they can kind of get in there and work things out. And when they go to the public, it is a one public voice. And the Republicans, like I said, you get 50 guys in a room, you're going to get at least
Matt
100 ideas.
Matt Erpelding, though, yesterday when he said he was happy that social issues hadn't crept up this year, sounds to me like they chose a leader who's a little bit more moderate, even on their side, as the
Yes,
public face.
even on their side, they kind of pushed that back and just kept it off the agenda, so to speak. And in some respects, that's probably a good thing. Let's get down to the hard business of governing the social issues. Some of them just went away because of external factors. It's kind of hard for Idaho to come up with some kind of a program on Medicaid expansion when, in fact, we really don't know what the federal government is going to do with Medicaid, period. And so, until that issue is resolved, the state cannot act on what's going to be handed to us. So, some of it was just happenstance, and some of it was, I think, by design. But at least we may have escaped some of the social impacts this go round.
We've got more with Steve Millington coming up. He's the chairman of the Twin Falls County Republican Party. It's 34. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com.
We don't know the revenues.
Okay, Steve Millington giving us a rundown here on taxes and spending this morning.
Well,
some of the off-air conversation is better than what takes place on air.
Yeah, maybe it's a good thing that we don't have. What happens if we get a hot mic in here?
Well, I don't worry about you because everything you say is clean.
Oh, okay.
I worry more about myself, but it's 8:43, 8:43, and we're at 33. Steve Millington is the chairman of the Twin Falls County Republican Party. Bill Colley with you as well this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. And a quick note, Waddell & Reed here in Twin Falls. This is an investment house that has been in business since 1937. One of the oldest firms in the country to offer mutual funds, and in fact, Waddell & Reed owns and manages two mutual fund families, investing by a conservative nature. And if you'd like to know, do they know what they're doing? Well, again, proof is in the pudding. 80 years in business. They take a planning approach, and they'll look at each piece of the puzzle for you as a client, knowing that you're an individual with separate needs and goals than perhaps other folks. They'll help manage your money, and at Waddell & Reed, they take planning personally. So, Garvey bonds being talked about again, which we had, in fact, we were talking about Matt Erpelding earlier, who said he didn't think we should borrow to pay for road repairs. Got to pay for road repairs somehow, and that either means raising taxes or borrow. And frankly, if we don't fix certain stretches of I-84 or Route 30, a lot of those trucks that come through this state will find alternate routes.
They're going to find someplace else to go. And more importantly, they will take their commerce and their economic activity with them somewhere else. And that's not a good thing. We are a major corridor from the Pacific Northwest, the major ports in Seattle and Portland. Those two areas funnel down through onto I-84 and across Idaho and then eastward to the rest of the country. Or else they hit I-15 south to Arizona and New Mexico. But we've got to have a good solid road structure to allow these trucks to move product. 40 years ago it was the railroads. I mean, you could stop at any railroad and it would be. I remember counting rail cars as a kid, watching and it would be 150 or 180 cars on every train, and wow! And now it's trucks. On a road trip a couple of years ago with a couple of buddies, we were going to Wyoming, and we just said, okay, here's a mile marker. We will count the trucks between this mile marker and 5 miles up the road. Just one-way trucks coming against us, and it was amazing the number of trucks that we passed in that 5-mile stretch. And they said, okay, just imagine what that looks like if you could just take a snapshot of that whole interstate system. And it's everything's on trucks anymore. We load it on trucks. Now, I know that rail is still a big issue, and lots of Raw materials, so to speak, are still shipped on rail. But when you get down to finished goods with the new Walmart mentality that it's just in time deliveries, they have to do it with trucks. They can't do it on rail.
Now, when we talk about conservatives and libertarians too as well, we want small government, but don't confuse that with anarchists because
There's a
we
big
understand
difference.
we have to have some roads open. I think though a lot of people in government at the state level are terrified of talking about raising taxes. So borrowing against federal what you believe will be future federal dollars seems to be the only solution we're going to have.
And that has worked well for us for the last 10 or 12 years when we borrowed the first Garvey bonds back in, I want to say, '05, but a few years ago. And we get a payment every year from the National Highway Trust Fund and we use that to pay off our bonds. Um, but keep in mind, we are going to see some shifting as to the amount of federal monies that Idaho gets. We are a net uh, beneficiary of highway trust funds. In other words, we pay in 100 and we get 115 or 120 back. So they have been extremely kind to Idaho, which makes you wonder, are we really as conservative as we say we are? Because we're sure taking an awful lot of federal money, aren't we?
Well, again, we've got all those ports that we've got on the West Coast that have to come through here.
That's right. So, but there's two or three things that we have to figure out how to make happen in the state of Idaho. One is education. That's constitutional. It's got to be fair, equal, and thorough, I think was the word. I can't remember the exact words in the Constitution. And then we have to maintain highways. That's how we get around here. We have to have something for the Justice Department. We have to take care of prisons and felons and that kind of stuff. We cannot escape that. That has to happen. And so we add those up and look at our total state budget. Man, just in the general fund, education eats up about 62 or 64% of the total state general fund budget. You put in transportation and the requirement that we have for it, it's huge numbers that, and a lot of it comes from the feds.
We've got a caller with us. And caller, it's 848. You're up next. You're on KLIX with Steve Millington and Bill Colley.
Yeah, you guys remember that accident that was on the freeway with the two trucks last week?
Right.
You had the beer and grape and all that stuff all the highway. I came by there on the frontage road, and in the time that it took them for the accident to happen and for them to block up the highway and get us on the frontage road, 80 to 90% of the trucks that were backed up by that, or of the vehicles that were backed up by that, were big rig trucks. I was just flabbergasted at how many trucks were stopped by that.
And they are having a difficult time navigating I-84 in certain spots now,
Yep.
too.
And you're right. I was not familiar with that particular accident, but I have been involved in where sometimes you get stuck in that kind of a deal, and the semi trucks backed up is just phenomenal. Huge numbers.
Another caller with us. You're up next. You're on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com.
Good morning.
I put bacon, but easy on that sauce.
I'm not getting that. Rough call there.
Yeah, that we try us again.
Wishing you well because of your cold, which has lingered for a couple of weeks now.
Yeah.
Better than last week.
Yep, much better.
We have another caller. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air.
Good morning.
Yes, I make it a point to call the state about these roads, whether or not it's Nathan Jerky at 736-3088 or Delphina at the governor's office. And that's numbers 334-2100, 334-2100. And the reason I'm giving the numbers is because if I'm the only person calling, it's not going to do much good.
Good point.
Just change your voice and
yeah, good
Well,
point.
my point is, Delphina promised me that they were going to have a hot plant open. She had at first told me we weren't going to have a hot plant open till June. And I said, now I may be repeating this, but this is a frustrating thing. And I said, June? I said, you can't wait till June. I mean, I can't even drive down the streets, whether or not it's Main Street or Overland in Burley. In certain areas, you are funneled down to a single lane, and when you have two trucks together, it's pretty hard for them to navigate that
That's right.
without an issue. Okay, and so here it's just a disaster. And I said to myself, I keep waiting somewhere. I travel all over southern Idaho, whether or not it's all the way to, Buell, Hagerman, or all the way to Pocatello. And I see no crews out doing anything. And I said to myself, I called Delphina 2 weeks ago and I said, what's going on? She says, I don't know, sir. I'm going to have to get back with you. Because I was hot. I wasn't rude, but I have a right to know. And so crews were supposed to be out fixing the roads last week, the way I understand it. If you've seen any from the state, not from the city, the county, but this is the state, then I would like you to tell me or whoever, but I have seen nothing. And so it's very frustrating, but we need to call in something. I'll hang up. Thanks.
Okay, two things.
Right.
The state Senate, the Senate Transportation Committee advanced their $300 million Garvey bonds, and basically the Garvey bonds are going to be for primarily
And you
new
issue those.
construction.
If you issue those, we'll get to work fast.
Yes, yeah, and keep in mind they're looking at major highway expansions, modifications. One of the key areas that they're looking at right now.
And it won't all be spent in Ada County?
No, is most of this one will be spent in Canyon County.
Right.
So
they need
they're
a lot
looking
of
at
it there.
84. Is it
And then-
84 or
and
86?
Route 30 and some of the other roads in
Yeah.
Minidoka.
So
and
they're looking at
counties.
that one from
Or 30 in Cache anyway.
Nampa, just past Caldwell. The Transportation Department has got most of the engineering done on that road already, and most of the right-of-ways have been purchased. So what we're talking about is the actual road construction. So that one could happen quickly. That's 150 million plus or minus. The other 150 million would be used in other other identified areas where we've got to have major road constructions. Now that is going to extend beyond just interstate highways. It's also going to involve other federal highways and state highways that the state of Idaho has responsibility for.
The other big story that I saw this morning was we had a vote, and it was overwhelming in the House yesterday, 51-19.
Yes.
To remove the grocery tax, sales tax on groceries. Governor Otter, at his meeting here in Hanson a couple of weeks ago, pretty much said that he's not in favor of that.
He didn't like that bill. He was not a big fan of that particular item, and I think part of his, I'm second guessing him here, and I have not asked him specifically what he dislikes about the bill, but across that cut and paste program on the tax policy in the state of Idaho, we seem to be wanting to just cut up little teeny pieces here and pieces here. What we really need to do is look at the entire tax structure in the state of Idaho and put together a little bit more thoughtful and careful tax package across all factions of the state of Idaho. And we start piecemealing these things a little bit here and a little bit here and a little bit here. And then all of a sudden, it has become so convoluted that you can't fix it regardless what you do. And that may be what the governor is concerned with, is that we need to take a little bit more comprehensive look at our tax policies instead of cutting them up into small pieces.
I think the other point is, though, he would say, all right, if you're going to do this, find me the revenue somewhere else.
And that, frankly, is about a $55 to $60 million problem that is going to have to be taken into consideration. And keep in mind that sales taxes also has some follow through where the state passes sales tax monies back to local business or local community, local government agencies. So counties and cities and these kinds of things, not a huge portion, but there's some part of the sales tax collections that are rebated back to local government agencies, and they would go away. That's gonna if we eliminate this sales tax, grocery sales tax, local entities are going to suffer somewhat.
Yesterday on CNN, your buddy Keith Ellison, who's the leader of the Democrats, or vice chair nationally, said that we need a transaction tax in this country.
Oh, man.
And then the conservative economist Peter Morisi says we need a value-added tax. Maybe they'll start considering those things even at the state level.
You know, I'm not a big fan of either transaction taxes or value-added taxes. I think there are better ways that we can get across that particular obstacle without going to that onerous a difficulty. I remember at one time working over in Europe and in Holland, and we had to always be concerned with how do we consider the value-added tax into the finished goods that we produced and sold. And so we get to deduct the taxes that we paid on raw materials and products coming into our manufacturing process, but we had to collect or remit a tax based on the value of the goods that we finally distributed, and it was a pretty difficult little process.
Good work for accountants.
Yeah, I'm sure that's been updated by computer systems so that it's not so difficult now, but back then it was a pain.
Yeah, get the abacus out and start sliding.
Oh boy, let me tell you what. And on the grocery tax, if we're not going to collect taxes on the food that I purchase to eat, why do I have to pay sales tax on the food I buy at a restaurant? And somebody makes the arguments, well, yeah, but it's prepared by somebody else, and so that, yeah, but it's still food, and I'm still eating it.
That person preparing it also is paying taxes.
That's exactly right.
Work.
So, there's got to be some, we got to find a different approach to that. That's not the right answer.
About 20 seconds. Any quick announcements?
None that I know of. The legislature is looking at an adjournment probably tomorrow. They did not think that they'd be able to get the rest of the tax bill and the transportation funding bills handled today, so that they're looking at maybe tomorrow.
All right. We'll talk to Steve Millington again soon. In fact, it'll be April. If not, well, and something big may come up in between. In the meantime.
It is getting to be April, isn't it?
Fox News, straight ahead. It's 33 on Top Story.